Greetings from Tokyo. This is Daisuke, and I hope all of you are doing very well today, my dear friends. Continuing with my discussion of the films of Dario Argento, today I would like to speak to you, if I may, about a film that is very peculiar, shall I say, in the context of Argento's filmography, and it is this film. The Phantom of the Opera. The Phantom of the Opera. This is a film that has, on paper anyway, all the elements, I think, that can form, potentially speaking, a really rich and wonderful film by Argento. So we have, of course, Argento at the helm. We have Julian Sands, the great actor Julian Sands, in the title role of the Phantom. We have Asia Argento, who is playing the role of Christine here. And she's actually quite good in this film. She's very down-to-earth, and she's, I think, quite likable in the role. And she makes Christine a very likable character. So it's nice to see Asia Argento's performance here. And we also have a lot of interesting talent behind the camera as well. We have the very famous director of photography, Ronnie Taylor, very famous. And also we have the music of Ennio Morricone, which is a nice continuation from the film that preceded this in Argento's filmography, which was the Stendhal Syndrome. So we have other elements as well. So all in all, it seems, on paper at least, to be something of an Argento potential masterwork, perhaps. And we also have opera, the Phantom of the Opera, and we have a monster, in the caverns and the underground layer underneath the opera house. And we've seen Argento deal in the past with opera and opera music, and it seems pretty obvious that Argento is a fan of opera. And so this seems like an ideal story for Argento to tackle. I mean, we've seen him deal with opera in the film Opera in the past. We've seen him use opera very effectively in the film Inferno, for example. And so, again, this seems like a film that, on paper at least, has the potential for being a great Argento classic. In execution of the film, I would say that I am of two minds with respect to this film. Now, without giving any spoilers away, lest I spoil it for those of you who haven't seen it, I would say that, on the one hand, this film is not at all scary, and it pains me to say that, because one of the things I love about Argento's great works is the amount of suspense that he is able to generate within a very simple setup of a scene. We've seen this in earlier films, of course. Deep Red comes to mind. Suspiria comes to mind immediately. Even his earlier works, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage and Four Flies on Grey Velvet, for example, creating suspense out of seemingly simple situations. Well, here we don't get, or at least I don't get, that same sense of suspense and thrill when we are looking at these scenes unfolding before our very eyes. And so that, on the one hand, that pains me a little bit, because I feel like there is too much stuff going on in the frame, and it's too direct, and there is none of the subtlety or the finesse of Argento at his best in his earlier filmography. Okay. On the other hand, I think there is a lot of gruesomeness on display, and there's a bit of a grand guignol kind of aspect to the film in terms of the bloody guts and the dirty sliminess of the affair, and everything seems a bit gritty and dusty, sweaty, as I said. The taverns they're kind of rough and grimy. So it isn't all in all a terrible film. I don't think it's completely a terrible film. I think it's not a good film, but it has certain redeemable qualities. So let me put it that way. So with that in mind, let me just say right now that I will be talking about some of the details of this film. And so if you haven't seen the film, I urge you to stop this video. And if you're interested, I suggest you take a look. Now, I've said I'm not completely enthusiastic about this film, but I do think that it is worth a look, even in terms of its just general quality. I don't think it's as bad as people generally in the critical community make it out to be. I think there are some redeemable qualities to it, and it is undeniably an Argento film. So I do recommend that Argento film fans, or people on an Argento journey, so to speak, look at this film at least once and see what you can make of it. And if you don't like it, well, you don't have to see it again. And if you like it, well, hopefully that will be a great way for me to engage with this film and to hear your thoughts and comments about the film. So in any event, if you haven't seen the film, I suggest that you do so, and you can stop this video and you can come back at any time. Okay, so you are here, so I am assuming that you've seen the film or you don't mind being spoiled. So I should say from the outset that this is the unrated version that I have, 100 minutes. This version here is quite bloody, and there are a lot of surprisingly like in-your-face bloody moments. And for example, the chandelier scene, when the chandelier falls and it crushes everyone, you see people's eyeballs pop out and their heads being like demolished. And you see people just randomly, you don't see the cutting, but you hear what's going on, and then you see bodies that have been cut in half, and a woman's tongue being ripped out, and yeah, just pretty gross things, actually. Close-ups of stab wounds, and you also have other bravura elements here that are so Argento, like a close-up shot of the inside of Carlotta's mouth, the opera diva's mouth, and that her tonsils, I think, are infected or something like that. So it's suddenly quite shocking to see some of these shots. And they do recall a lot of Argento's brilliance in the past, the idea of close-ups of mouths. We've seen this in Deep Red, with Helga Ullmann drinking the water and spitting it out immediately. We've also seen this idea of the inside of a throat. That reminds us of the famous shot of the Stendhal syndrome, where the pill is being swallowed and you follow a pill all the way down. And then we do have, as I say, just gruesome set pieces of just nastiness. And it reminds us of the way that Argento handles special effects in his previous films, practical special effects. However, I should say that in this instance, it feels very direct and in your face, and maybe almost too much so. I would say that there is none of the subtlety, none of the finesse of the way that he handled these sorts of special effects shots in his earlier works. It seems like the camera is lingering a little bit too long on a special effect, or it seems like there is a little bit too much brightness to show off the special effect, and the light is too bright, so it seems like it feels too much of it like a prosthetic rather than an actual depiction of violence, screen violence. So this adds to the overall sense of disjointed oddness to the film, and As I said before, it's a film that I don't think is a very good film, but it's a film that, while it's not a good film, it does have redeemable qualities. And so I would say that part of that grouping of redeemable qualities would be the fact that Argento does seem to be going for the jugular a lot. And I admire him for his audacity, really. The Chandelier Scene is quite effective. Although the Chandelier Scene is very interesting too, right? Because you have this amazing set piece of the chandelier falling and suddenly people just being crushed. But right after that, you see like a statue or something fall, and it falls, and it's in line with Carlotta, and it's about to hit Carlotta, the opera diva that no one likes. And she's sort of the villain of the piece in a certain way. And so you'd expect to have the villain go out with a bang. And we've seen this in past Argento films. But here, we don't get that. We just get her, and like the thing hits her on the head, and she just falls over, and that's basically it. You never see her again. So you assume the worst for her, unfortunately. But it's not a very overwhelming finish to a character that I think we've been set up to dislike. So that seemed a bit anticlimactic in my opinion. I talk about the special effects in this film, but there are some special effects that I think are a bit pretty weird. For example, there's the shot where the Phantom, Julian Sands' Phantom, is on the rooftop, and he's seeing the image of the giant mousetrap and the kind of the naked people that are trapped in the mousetrap, and then he sees then a vision of a very scantily clad Christine in the sky. That seems a bit, maybe it seems a bit dated now in terms of the visual effects that are being employed, and it adds to the overall feel of the film, which is it's very ornate. Perhaps too ornate. There seems to be too much stuff going on, and perhaps there's a lot of show but maybe little substance, which I think it doesn't lend itself to an overall fulfilling view of a film. But let's go back to some of the more redeemable qualities of the film. So I think the first redeemable quality to mention is the performance by Asia Argento. I think, again, she gives us a great performance here. She is not just a sexy, beautiful woman. I think she has an earthiness, and she has a real down-to-earth quality that makes her very likable and makes her Christine very likable. And so I really like Asia Argento's performance here. Also, Julian Sands' Phantom is quite a peculiar depiction of the Phantom, and I think I really admire his Phantom, although there are a lot of over-the-top moments, I admit. There are some really great choices, I think, that are employed. On the one hand, phantoms in past films have been disfigured, of course, but here we have a very beautiful-looking Phantom, at least on the outside. He is not disfigured, and he doesn't have to wear a mask necessarily. Long blonde hair, and he's very hulking, and he's a very menacing figure, but he doesn't have any of the physical disfigurement that other past film depictions of the Phantom have. So that is one interesting choice. And another interesting choice is that he is he's not completely evil. Remember the scene where he is killing the guy who is about to, or he wants to molest a little girl. It's a really nasty piece of business, but he kills the guy, and the Phantom lets the girl go. And so this would seem to suggest that the Phantom does have some kind of moral compass. And that's a moment when I really admired him for his choice. I was actually afraid for a moment. I thought he might kill the little girl, but he didn't. He let her go. And so that indeed was an indication of, I think, the Phantom's good nature, or at least part of his good nature, or at least some semblance of good in a character which is, for the most part, undeniably quite bad. And I think there is something to be said about the film revealing the Phantom very early on. You know, the film doesn't give us a mystery and doesn't have the Phantom hiding in the shadows. He's introduced pretty early on in the narrative, and thus we come to, I think, sympathize in some respects with him and his plight and what he wants to do. He really just wants to help Christine because he loves Christine, and he and she have a sexual relationship, which is for the most part a mutual one, although there's one moment of rape, which is a bit, not a bit, but quite unpleasant. And they have a telepathic relationship, which is quite perplexing, but you just go along with it and just accept it for what it is. And he's a Phantom that was, I guess, befriended by rats when he was a little boy. So, it's quite an undeniably interesting depiction of this character of the Phantom. So take it or leave it. You can either dislike it, and then there's actually very little to like about this film, or you can take this and see Julian Sand's work here, which I think is worthy of a certain degree of praise here, because he does do something here which is very interesting, which is he is at once very, shall I say, even charming, but on the other hand, quite menacing and very evil. So there is a balancing act here that's quite tricky, and I would say that perhaps he does a fine job. So does that help me like the film even more? I don't know. I think there is a high body count, which is, in a horror film, it's I don't want to say nice, but it's part of the aspect of a horror film, which is what is the body count, etc. But the problem with that, I think, in this film is that there is very little suspense generated, because the victims are not, we don't get to know them very well. They're just introduced and then suddenly dispatched. So there's no real tension in these scenes of murder. And therefore, it's not a scary film, in my opinion. It's not a scary horror film that is suspenseful. It is a spectacle film. And it is a spectacle film that centers on the relationship between the Phantom and Christine, with lots of violence in the periphery. So that's how I feel about the film. And it's not the best Argento film in the world, and it's certainly not a film that I would recommend people watch at the very beginning. But it is something that is worth looking at, that's for sure, because as I say, there are certain redeemable qualities to it. And let me go back also to the element of the opera. There are scenes where Argento lets his camera linger, especially at the end of the film with the credits rolling. He lets his camera linger around the opera house, the Emperor Opera House. So you can tell that there is a loving, guiding hand from Argento, so to speak, because you could sense that he is maybe in love with this setting and this art form that is opera. We've seen this before in his previous works in his filmography. Opera, of course, and his use of Verdi in Inferno. Very intriguing use of Verdi. He was also involved in production of Macbeth, which I hopefully will talk about later. So there is a link. There is a certain link that Argento seems to have with the art form of opera. And so it's a wonderful it's a wonderful thing to see, I think. And there are moments where opera is being performed. Christine is, of course, the young opera singer, and so we see Christine performing on the stage. And these scenes, I think, are shot quite well, quite competently, I think. And so that is something to be said as perhaps another thematic through line that we can connect with this work and his previous works. But ultimately, it is a film that is highly, highly flawed. And it pains me to say that, because I really love Argento's work. very much so. It is a flawed work, but it is one that does have good bits in it. And I think that, unfortunately, the good bits do not outweigh the not so good bits. That being said, you should watch the film for the good bits. Okay, my friends, let me end it there, and I hope this was interesting for you. If you have any questions or comments, of course, please feel free to leave them below in the comment section. I will be very happy to address your comments as they come. Next time I will be talking about Argento's film Sleepless. So until we meet again, my friends, I hope you are happy and healthy and well, and that you'll continue to watch a lot of great, great movies. Take care.